Jerusalem is a study in contrast. It's been both the backwater of the world and the center of the world. Today, it is the center of a whirlpool of the great forces of good and evil. It is the place that has been known for great light and great darkness. This coming together of contradictions in Jerusalem overall is known. But perhaps in no specific place in Jerusalem are these contrasts more juxtaposed and more overlooked than in the valley called Hinnom. The Hinnom Valley is one of the three primary valleys that forms Jerusalem today. Now, the valleys of Jerusalem is not normally how we think of this city. We think of it in terms of the three great hills: Mount of Olives to the east, Mount Moriah in the middle, and Mount Zion to the west, which used to be called the Western Hill. But you don't have hills without valleys. And so there are also, and there must be also, three valleys. The Kidron Valley to the east, the Tyropoeon Valley in the middle, and the Hinnom Valley to the west. The Kidron Valley is the most famous. It is the deepest. It is the valley through which the Messiah will come when he enters through the Golden Gate to Jerusalem, the city of gold. On the Kidron Valley's east bank is the Mount of Olives, and with it, the Garden of Gethsemane. In Hebrew, Gat Shmanim, which simply means olive press. The Tyropoeon Valley is the valley that splits the old city into two halves, that part which stands on Mount Moriah, and that part which stands on the Western Hill. This is the valley that forced Herod the Great to build a western wall for the Temple Mount. Today, this wall is called just that, the Western Wall. It's also known as the Kotel and also the Wailing Wall. Without the Tyropoeon Valley, the Jews would not pray in what is today their holiest place of worship. They worship in a valley today. They worship in the lowest ground that resides in the old city walls, not on a hilltop, not on Mount Moriah, where the temple stood. Even today, this valley and the worship that happens in it is a reminder of the long Jewish exile. And to the west of these two valleys, the Kidron Valley and the Tyropoeon Valley, is a third valley, the Hinnom Valley, which is the main topic of this series. But before discussing the Hinnom Valley and what it means for us concerning life, death, hell, and redemption, let's pause and think about the three valleys together as a unit. Look at the three. Do you see anything? Do you know your Hebrew alphabet? Does this pattern of the three valleys remind you of any letter? The three valleys are actually built as the letter Shin in Hebrew. The Shin is the letter that forms part of the word Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, and Messiah, Moshiach, and salvation, Yehoshua. It is the only Hebrew letter with three prongs, if you will. But there's a problem with the structure of these valleys because they actually don't precisely fit the letter Shin. They precisely fit a reversed Shin, if you will. Do you see it? It's the mirror image of the Shin. But we can solve this problem. How? Instead of looking from above, let us go down deep into the earth and look back up at the sky. In that case, the portrait of these three valleys forms the letter Shin perfectly. And this is your first clue to where we are headed in this series. Because unlike many of our tours, this one must necessarily go down. Not just into the valley of shadows, but deeper and darker still. We are essentially going to hell and back, because that is where our story takes us. Now, many of you already know why the Hinnom Valley is associated with hell. But even if you do, you might find some perspectives in this series that you hadn't considered before. And that is exactly what constitutes an adventure versus a tour. In an adventure, you don't know what might happen or where you might end up. Now that we have introduced the three valleys of Jerusalem, let us turn our attention to the Hinnom Valley. Yes, the Hinnom Valley is associated with death and hell, but that was not the way it was in the beginning, because God creates everything good. God was there first in Genesis 1, creating the land and calling it good. This valley and the water that flowed through it was part of the flow of life on the earth. How this land was horribly defiled is a story we must also tell. But as Arthur Burke likes to say regarding defiled land, God was there first. The first mention of this valley in Scripture is in Joshua 15:8, and it is called Ben Hinnom, or the son of Hinnom. Who was Hinnom and the son of Hinnom? That is the first mystery of this place. But whoever he was, his valley became part of the border of the tribe of Judah, for it is in defining Judah's boundaries that the Bible first introduces it. Joshua 15:8 says, "Then it ran up the valley of Ben Hinnom along the southern slope of the Jebusite city, that is, Jerusalem. From there it climbed to the top of the hill west of the Hinnom Valley at the northern end of the valley of Rephaim." Now, what is this mention of the valley of Rephaim? That valley, Emek Rephaim, is marked today by a road called Emek Rephaim. That name means Valley of the Giants. This valley, which flows to the Mediterranean Sea, comes up almost meeting the Hinnom Valley, which flows to the Dead Sea. That line between the two valleys is called a watershed. This watershed defines what water flows west to the Mediterranean versus east to the Dead Sea. On that watershed are some famous landmarks. The first station, which is the end of the railroad line built by the Ottoman Empire. Another landmark on that watershed line is the King David Hotel, the hotel in which presidents and heads of state stay when they visit. The watershed line runs very close to the city tower, the tallest building in West Jerusalem. The boundary between the tribes is not, however, the watershed line. It is in the middle of the valley, in the bottom of the Valley of Hinnom, and then shifts to the top of the hill, probably about here at the top of the end of the Valley of the Giants. The next mention of the Hinnom Valley is in the tribal boundary description for the tribe that borders Judah, that is, Benjamin. Joshua 18:16 says, "The boundary went down from the foot of the hill facing the valley of Ben Hinnom, north of the valley of Rephaim. It continued down the Hinnom Valley along the southern slope of the Jebusite city." This description seems pretty much the same thing, right? Except for one difference. Did you notice it? The path of the borders are proceeding in different directions. The description of Judah's boundary is heading westward, uphill. The description of the boundary of Benjamin is heading eastward, or downhill. Why? Could it relate to God's design for how the tribe of Benjamin and Judah should cooperate? Or is it a sign of the struggle that this valley will be for Judah? Is it a sign of the clash of Eastern and Western cultures that have always earmarked the land of Israel? But without a doubt, Jerusalem has to be part of the answer. Jerusalem is in the region of Judea, the name for the land controlled by the southern kingdom of Israel after the 10 tribes would split away to the north. Jerusalem is in Judea, but Jerusalem is not in the tribal portion of the tribe of Judah, but rather it resides as part of the tribal lands of Benjamin. The boundaries clearly show this. Benjamin was the only child of Jacob who was born in the land of Israel, and into very difficult circumstances. His mother died in childbirth. He never got to know her. So Benjamin gets the honor of holding Jerusalem. Perhaps this is also the reason that the first king of Israel, Saul, was from the tribe of Benjamin as well. And what about the Hinnom Valley as regards Jerusalem? In those early days, during the life of David, before there was a temple, pilgrims to Jerusalem would have traveled down the valley of Hinnom to reach Jerusalem, where the tabernacle would have stood. In addition, you can see that if Judah's borders were more straight, Judah should have included Jerusalem in its territory. But instead, it is as if there was a notch cut out to allow for Jerusalem. Much of this notch is defined by the valley of Hinnom. In history, Judah made a tremendous sacrifice for Benjamin. In Egypt, Judah was going to imprison himself in place of Benjamin. And this notch is almost like an eternal banner for that great sacrifice, showing that Judah also gave Benjamin the honor of having Jerusalem in its territory. But in another way, Jerusalem can be thought of as being between the two tribal boundaries, since the city borders the land of Judah on the south and is at the edge of Benjamin also. What could God be saying in this? Well, practically, it helped strengthen the union of all 12 tribes. Judah was the son of Leah, and Benjamin was the son of Rachel. So in that sense, it was essentially a neutral ground, a good place for a capital city. Even in the United States, its capital, Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, is situated between Virginia and Maryland. Virginia definitely being a dominant southern state, and Maryland being more neutral. In the same way, Jerusalem was located right on the boundary between dominant Judah to the south and more congenial and less confrontational Benjamin. And thus, the capital of Jerusalem was born, with its southern and western borders being the Valley of Hinnom. After the Hinnom Valley is mentioned in Scripture as a dividing line between the tribal boundaries of Judah and Benjamin, its very next mention in the Bible is about 700 years into the future, in about 740 BC, when a righteous king of Judah named Jotham, the 12th king from David, tries to bring a halt to some of the idolatrous practices of his day. As part of a long list of righteous deeds, Jotham does the following. He also defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, Ben-Hinnom, that no man might make his son or daughter pass through the fire for Moloch, 2 Kings 23:10. What is Topheth and who is Moloch? The key to understanding them both might come from Isaiah 30:33, which says, "For Topheth has long been ready. Indeed, it has been prepared for the king. He has made it deep and large, a pyre of fire with plenty of wood. The breath of the Lord, like a torrent of brimstone, sets it afire." Topheth is therefore literally the place of burning, an altar where the children were sacrificed. And Molech is a play on words. Did you notice the word king in the Isaiah passage? A king is a melech. Thus, Molech is a twisting of the word king. The O sound in Molech could derive from the word Boshet, or shame, which is associated with Baal. Molech is therefore a shameful king. We don't know exactly who first brought the god Molech into the Hinnom Valley, but it could have been Solomon. 1 Kings 11:6 and 7 tell us, Then Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as his father David had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain before or east of Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. 1 Kings 11:6 and 7. So if Chemosh was worshipped to the east of Jerusalem, it does leave open the possibility that Moloch was worshipped in another location, and not in a high place, but in a valley. So it is possible that the worship of Moloch had been happening in the valley of Hinnom for a very long time, more than 200 years, getting progressively worse. By the time Jotham defiled that place to prevent it from being used, children were passing through the fire for the god Moloch. This practice is as bad as it sounds, even worse. When a child passes through the fire, they don't come out alive. Thus, the Hinnom Valley became the Valley of Death. Not the Valley of the Shadow of Death, but literally the Valley of Death. What was entailed in passing through the fire? The practice probably went something like this. The child was brought to a flaming altar with the god Molech in the flames. The child is thrown into the fire, into the arms of the god Molech, while drums beat and tambourines shake to drown out any cries. And once the body is burned up sufficiently, it falls through the arms into the fire below, essentially into the belly of the god. What kind of children were sacrificed? The first children to go were probably the children that were born through intercourse with the female prostitutes associated with the god Molech. Because there was no birth control in those days, there was no easy way to prevent the birth of such babies. They were therefore expendable and used to feed the gods. But children of the general population could be sacrificed at the will of the parents. Why? It has been widely written in history that such sacrifices were to bring rain or other benefits to the community, or to appease the gods. But such general benefits could also be a smokescreen for a more personal reason: pleasure. When a person willingly gives over his or her body to the control of demons, it can happen that if the sin is wicked enough, that the forces of darkness will take pleasure in it and join with the person to activate their senses of pleasure. The goal then is to get that person hooked or addicted to that sick kind of pleasure, not unlike the pattern we see in serial killers today who must kill repeatedly. Satan has wanted to kill the seed of humans since he learned that God's plan for redemption would come from the seed of a woman. Thus, he will partner with mankind's flesh to find any reason, any excuse possible to kill human beings. Perhaps the reason the child sacrifice appears so many times in Scripture is that it is one of the main tactics of Satan to attack God's kingdom. The children don't really pass through the fire, they die. It is the child's soul that passes through the fire, not the body. Today, Satan's strategy is no different, only the tactics have changed. In Islamic culture, jihad can be the justification to kill children. In Hindu culture, wives are burned after their husbands die. In Western culture, the best way for Satan to remove children from the earth is through abortion, 50 million in the United States alone. We know today that after abortion, there is a strong sense of shame that often comes over the parents. It could not have been any different in the past. Perhaps this is also where the shame comes from in respect to Moloch, the Molech, rather than Melech, the king. Today, parents who have participated in abortions need to come to God and grieve the loss, receive His forgiveness, and relief from the shame. Many stories are told of the souls of aborted babies being transported safely into heaven. Stories told by those who visit heaven briefly and return. Satan may order the killing of the body, but the soul is in the hands of God. After Jotham cleaned up the valley, other kings of Judah would bring back child sacrifice to Moloch. But the last word on this topic comes from God himself. He says in Jeremiah 7 and also in chapter 31 that this act of his people to sacrifice their children to Moloch was so far away from his will, his desire, that he says it did not even enter his mind or heart that his people would do such a thing. Is there any other statement from God in Scripture quite like this? To sacrifice children in a valley of Jerusalem is so far out of the bounds from God's plan, it can hardly be fathomed. It seems to be one of the final blows, if not the final blow, that precipitated God's decision to destroy the first temple and send his people into Babylonian exile. Let us ponder the immensity of such a sentiment from God. Until next time, when we return and begin to look at this valley in the time of the Second Temple. At the end of the period of the First Temple, Jeremiah famously characterized God's opinion of this valley of Hinnom. Let's look at what Jeremiah writes in chapter 7. They have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, and it did not come into my mind, literally heart. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no longer be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth, because there is no other place. Then I will make to cease from the cities of Judah and from the streets of Jerusalem the voice of joy and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, for the land will become a ruin. Jeremiah 7, 31 through 34. By the time of the return from exile in the period of the Second Temple, this valley became the remembrance marker for all that went wrong in the kingdom of Judah. And so Ben Hinnom became Gehenna, a euphemism for hell. We find this in the Mishnah in Kiddushin chapter 4 verse 14 and in Pirkei Avot chapter 1 verse 5. The Gospels also record Jesus using this term as well, even multiple times in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. One of the more famous references being, "But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, 'You good for nothing,' shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell," literally Gehenna. Jesus' brother James said in his book that the tongue is a fire and is set on fire by Gehenna. What do we make of this behavior of the Jewish people to turn this valley into an icon of hell? Wouldn't it be easier just to not talk about it anymore? Is this valley not the great skeleton in the closet of the kingdom of Judah? I would say that there are two reasons. First, God said that the days are coming when this valley will be called the Valley of Slaughter. That was fulfilled in the events of the Babylonian exile. However, the idea of attaching to this place the concept of hell, the Greek word Gehenna, is, in a sense, a larger fulfillment of God's promise that this valley would be known for death. Second, there's a value within the Jewish people to keep alive in the future the remembrance of the tragedies of the past. Not only does this serve as a warning to the future, it helps redeem the tragedy by utilizing its story for the good of future generations.